As night gently wraps around you like a familiar blanket, let your mind drift toward a realm that exists somewhere between memory and dream. A place where talking animals share ancient wisdom, where forests conceal both danger and sanctuary, and where the simplest choices can lead to the most profound transformations. Tonight, we journey not into the bright, sanitized fairy tales of modern picture books, but into their older, deeper shadows, the original stories that have whispered through centuries, carried on the breath of countless storytellers across continents and generations. Perhaps you remember these tales from childhood, stories told at bedside or read from colorful pages, where good triumphs and endings shine with happiness. But beneath their polished surfaces lies another landscape entirely, one shaped by the fears, hopes, and hard-earned wisdom of our ancestors. A terrain both beautiful and unsettling, where darkness and light exist not as opposites, but as necessary companions in the long human journey toward understanding. These ancient narratives have traveled across mountains and oceans, through wars and peace, surviving not merely as entertainment, but as vessels of knowledge. They come to us now as gentle messengers from the past, carrying within their seemingly simple structures the complex truths about survival, transformation, and the eternal cycles of loss and renewal that define the human experience. Tonight, as you rest, we will walk slowly through this hidden garden of stories, examining the seeds from which familiar tales have grown, and discovering the deeper roots that anchor them to our collective memory. The path is winding but gentle, and there is no need to hurry. Each step reveals another facet, another layer of meaning tucked beneath the veneer of once upon a time. The oldest fairy tales began long before writing, emerging in an age when stories were spoken, treasures passed from one generation to the next. Through the sacred act of telling, they were born not from a single imagination, but shaped by thousands of voices across hundreds of years, each teller adding subtle changes, each culture weaving in threads of its unique experience. Like rivers carving their patient way through stone, these tales found the paths of least resistance into the human heart, carrying with them the sediment of ancient knowledge. In the quiet darkness of medieval cottages, as winter winds howled outside and families gathered close to hearth fires, these stories served as more than mere distraction. They became survival manuals disguised as entertainment, offering practical wisdom about navigating a world filled with genuine dangers: famine, wolves, disease, and the sometimes predatory nature of other humans. When a mother told her children about a girl in a red hood meeting a wolf in the forest, she was not simply spinning fantasy, but teaching vital lessons about caution and discernment in a world where actual wolves claim the unwary. These tales were not originally intended for children at all, but rather for entire communities. Adults gathered around fires or in village squares, listening as storytellers unraveled narratives that address the full complexity of human experience: desire and loss, cruelty and kindness, the painful process of growth, and the inevitability of death. Nothing was softened or sanitized. The violence in these early versions served as acknowledgement of life's genuine harshness, while the magical elements offered something equally important: the promise that even in the darkest circumstances, transformation remained possible. Consider how different the oldest version of Little Red Riding Hood appears from the gentle bedtime story many know today. In Charles Perrault's 17th century telling, the story ends with the wolf consuming both grandmother and child, with no woodcutter arriving to save them. The tale concludes with the simple, stark warning that predatory men with charming manners pose grave dangers to young women. This was not a fanciful invention, but a reflection of very real threats in a world where young women often traveled alone and vulnerable through forests and fields. Even more ancient variations collected by folklorists suggest darker elements still. In some oral traditions, the wolf tricks the child into consuming pieces of her grandmother's flesh and drinking her blood before revealing his deception. This horrific detail served not to traumatize listeners, but to underscore with absolute clarity the life or death importance of recognizing evil, even when it wears a convincing disguise. The visceral nature of the imagery ensured the message would be remembered, embedding itself in the mind more firmly than any gentle admonition could. As we drift deeper into the forest of these ancient narratives, patterns begin to emerge among the shadows and clearings. Many of the most enduring fairy tales follow a structure that reflects the universal human experience of separation, initiation, and return, the essential pattern of all transformation. The hero or heroine must leave the safety of home, face trials that strip away former identities, and return changed, bearing gifts of wisdom for the community. This pattern appears across cultures with remarkable consistency, suggesting it speaks to something fundamental in the human journey. The initiatory nature of these tales reveals itself in their recurring motifs: the abandoned child, the seemingly impossible task, the helper who appears at the moment of greatest need, and the ultimate transformation that cannot be reversed. When Hansel and Gretel are abandoned in the forest, when Cinderella is reduced to servitude, when Beauty must leave her father to live with the beast, these are not merely plot points, but symbolic representations of necessary separations that precede all genuine growth. Consider how many beloved tales begin with some form of loss or abandonment. Snow White's mother dies. Cinderella loses both parents and becomes essentially an orphan under her stepmother's roof. Hansel and Gretel are abandoned by parents who cannot feed them. This recurring pattern reflects a psychological truth: that growth requires leaving behind the known world and venturing into unfamiliar territory. The fairy tale makes literal this psychological necessity, placing its protagonists in forests, on mountaintops, in the depths of the sea, or in the castle of a monster, all spaces where old rules no longer apply and new wisdom must be earned. Through direct experience, the forest itself appears so frequently in European fairy tales that it becomes almost a character in its own right, a place of both danger and possibility, where ordinary rules are suspended and transformation becomes possible. To the agricultural peoples of medieval Europe, the forest represented the wilderness beyond the boundaries of civilization, a place where one could become lost, but also, paradoxically, found. When Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, or Snow White enter the forest, they are crossing a threshold between the known world and a realm of deeper truths and harsher realities. In many tales, this journey into the unknown is marked by encounters with beings who exist at the boundaries between worlds. The talking animals who offer help in countless stories, birds who speak warnings, foxes who share wisdom, or frogs who request kindness, represent humanity's ancient understanding that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. When the youngest son in a tale shows kindness to an animal that his brothers have ignored, he is rewarding not merely compassion, but openness to guidance that comes in unfamiliar forms. The witches, who appear so frequently in these ancient tales, carry particularly complex symbolic meanings. Far from the one-dimensional villains of modern adaptations, these figures often embody the ambivalent power of the feminine, both nurturing and destructive, wise and dangerous. The witch in her forest cottage represents knowledge that exists outside socially approved channels, wisdom that society both fears and needs. She is the healer who knows which plants cure and which kill, the midwife who understands the mysteries of birth and death, the elder woman whose power no longer derives from youth or beauty. When Hansel and Gretel encounter the witch in her house made of treats, they meet a figure who represents both nurturing abundance and predatory consumption. The witch offers food freely, but plans to consume the children themselves, a perfect encapsulation of nature's dual aspects as both sustaining and devouring. The children's triumph comes not through physical strength, but through cunning and cooperation, suggesting that human intelligence and social bonds offer protection against natural forces that remain fundamentally amoral. The spinning wheel that pricks Sleeping Beauty's finger, the poisoned apple offered to Snow White, the single pea that disturbs the princess's sleep. These seemingly small objects carry enormous symbolic weight, representing the ways that fate often turns on seemingly insignificant moments or choices. When the 13th fairy curses the infant princess because she was not invited to the celebration, we glimpse an ancient understanding that excluded or marginalized forces inevitably return, often with destructive power. The tale teaches not merely caution, but the importance of inclusion, of honoring all aspects of existence rather than attempting to banish those elements we find troubling. Perhaps no fairy tale element has been more misunderstood than magic itself. In contemporary adaptations, magic often appears as mere spectacle or convenient plot solution. The fairy godmother who transforms pumpkins into carriages with a wave of her wand, or the kiss that breaks an evil spell. But in the oldest versions of these tales, magic represents something far more profound: the mysterious processes of transformation that cannot be controlled or fully understood by rational means. When base metals turn to gold, when beasts become human, when the dead return to life, these magical transformations symbolize the genuine mysteries at the heart of existence. The caterpillar that becomes a butterfly, the seed that transforms into a tree, the child who grows into an adult. All these natural processes remain, at their core, as miraculous and inexplicable as any fairy tale magic. The stories acknowledge what science has only recently begun to articulate, that transformation is the fundamental nature of reality, and that nothing remains permanently fixed or unchangeable. Even the familiar happily ever after carries deeper implications than modern readers might suspect. In many older versions, the ending comes not with marriage, but with some form of restoration or balance. The unjustly persecuted are recognized, the greedy are humbled, order returns to a disordered kingdom. These endings reflect not naive optimism, but a profound faith in the eventual triumph of natural justice, even if that justice might require generations to unfold fully. As we walk further into this enchanted landscape, we discover that even the most familiar figures, the princesses, princes, and kings that populate these ancient tales, carried meanings far removed from their Disney counterparts. The princess, locked in a tower or placed under an enchanted sleep, represents not merely a damsel awaiting rescue, but potential that remains dormant until awakened through some form of initiation. When Sleeping Beauty pricks her finger and falls into her deep slumber, she enacts the necessary withdrawal from ordinary consciousness that precedes all significant transformation. The prince who awakens her represents not simply masculine rescue, but the active principle that complements her receptivity, together forming the complete circuit necessary for renewal. This complementary relationship appears throughout world mythology and folk traditions, symbolizing the eternal dance between active and receptive forces required for creation in all its forms. When Beauty and the Beast finally recognize each other as equals, despite their apparent differences, the tale celebrates the union of seemingly opposing qualities within the complete human being. The kings and queens who appear so regularly in these tales represent not merely social authority, but aspects of the mature self, the inner sovereignty achieved when wisdom balances power. When an old king promises his daughter to whoever can perform an impossible task, he embodies the necessary challenge that must be overcome before genuine maturity can be claimed. The false princes who attempt shortcuts or rely on deception inevitably fail, teaching that authentic development cannot be rushed or falsified. Even the seemingly one-dimensional villains of fairy tales, the wicked stepmothers, jealous sisters, or greedy merchants, carry psychological complexity when viewed through this deeper lens. The stepmother who persecutes her beautiful stepdaughter represents not merely female rivalry, but the shadow aspects of the feminine that must be confronted and integrated rather than denied. Her jealousy of youth and beauty reflects genuine human fears about aging and loss of vitality, concerns that remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The repetition of threes that appears throughout fairy tales, three brothers, three tasks, three wishes, three attempts, reflects ancient wisdom about the nature of process. The first attempt typically represents physical effort, the second mental strategy, and the third a unification of heart, mind, and body that finally succeeds where partial approaches failed. This pattern teaches that genuine achievement requires the integration of multiple faculties, not merely strength or cleverness in isolation. Similarly, the recurring motif of the youngest child succeeding where older siblings have failed carries subtle lessons about the nature of genuine wisdom. The youngest brother or sister typically possesses qualities the older siblings lack: humility, compassion, openness to guidance, willingness to appear foolish. When this seemingly unpromising figure ultimately triumphs, the tale suggests that conventional advantages like physical strength or worldly cunning may prove less valuable than qualities society often undervalues. As darkness gathers and night deepens around us, we might wonder why these ancient tales so often contain elements of genuine horror: cannibalism, mutilation, abandonment, and betrayal. These dark threads were not woven into the tapestry of fairy tales merely for shock value or entertainment, but as acknowledgments of the genuine shadows that exist within human experience and within each human heart. By giving these shadows form and name, the tales create safe containers for examining aspects of existence too threatening to confront directly. When the queen in Snow White demands the heart of her stepdaughter as proof of murder, when the wolf consumes grandmother and child, when Bluebeard's wife discovers the murdered bodies of previous spouses, these moments of horror name real human capacities for cruelty and destruction. Rather than pretending such capacities don't exist, the fairy tale acknowledges them fully while suggesting they can be overcome through courage, community, and moral discernment. The child listening learns not that the world contains no monsters, but that monsters can be defeated. This function becomes particularly clear in tales featuring supernatural antagonists like ogres, giants, or dragons. These creatures embody forces that threaten the community: famine, plague, tyranny, or war, giving concrete form to abstract threats. When Jack climbs the beanstalk and outwits the giant, stealing back wealth that properly belongs to humans, he enacts a symbolic reclaiming of prosperity from forces that would hoard or destroy it. His triumph celebrates human ingenuity as a counterforce to brute strength and power. Many fairy tales contain surprisingly pragmatic economic concerns beneath their magical surfaces. Cinderella's rise from hearth to palace, Jack's acquisition of the giant's treasure, Puss in Boots's clever engineering of his master's social advancement. These narratives reflect the very real concerns of peasant societies where survival remained precarious and social mobility virtually non-existent. The magical transformations in status that occur in these tales offered psychological compensation for the rigid class structures that confined most listeners to lives of hardship with little hope for material improvement. Yet alongside these practical concerns runs a deeper current of spiritual wisdom. The trials faced by fairy tale protagonists often involve not merely physical challenges, but tests of character, moments when compassion must be chosen over convenience, truth over expedience, integrity over immediate advantage. When the hero shares his last crust of bread with a stranger who later reveals himself as a magical helper, the tale teaches that generosity ultimately serves the giver as much as the recipient, a piece of spiritual wisdom found in traditions worldwide. The task of sorting seeds, gathering impossible objects, or answering unanswerable riddles that appears in so many tales symbolizes the necessary process of discrimination, learning to separate truth from falsehood, appearance from reality, the essential from the trivial. When Psyche in the Greek myth must sort a massive pile of mixed seeds in a single night, her seemingly impossible labor represents the human task of bringing order to the chaos of experience, a process that requires both patience and discernment. Similarly, the disguises that feature prominently in many tales, princes who appear as beggars, princesses who hide their beauty under ashes or animal skins, teach the essential lesson that appearance often masks reality. The ugly crone who requests shelter may be a goddess in disguise. The frightening beast may harbor a noble heart. The simple peasant might possess wisdom kings would envy. By repeatedly turning assumptions upside down, the fairy tale trains its listeners in the vital skill of looking beyond surface appearances to deeper truths. This wisdom reaches perhaps its fullest expression in tales like Beauty and the Beast, where love itself becomes the agent of transformation. When Beauty learns to see beyond the beast's frightening appearance to the wounded heart beneath, she enacts the profound human capacity for compassion that transcends fear and prejudice. Her willingness to connect with what initially seems monstrous leads not to destruction, but to restoration. The beast returns to his human form, but only after Beauty has learned to love him as he is, not as she wishes him to be. As our journey continues through this landscape of symbol and wonder, we notice how many fairy tales feature journeys to the underworld or encounters with death itself. Sleeping Beauty's 100-year sleep, Snow White's glass coffin, the various protagonists who must travel to lands east of the sun and west of the moon. These narratives acknowledge death not as finality, but as transition, a necessary phase in the cycle of renewal. When the hero descends to the underworld to retrieve something precious, whether a loved one, a magical object, or hidden knowledge, they enact humanity's eternal hope that even death's kingdom can be entered and returned from, bearing gifts. The motif of resurrection appears with surprising frequency throughout fairy tales worldwide. Snow White awakens from death-like sleep. The grandmother and child emerge unharmed from the wolf's belly in some versions of Red Riding Hood. The beast transforms from apparent death to renewed life. These moments reflect humanity's oldest and most persistent hope, that life continues beyond apparent endings, that transformation remains possible even in the face of seemingly permanent loss. Throughout many European fairy tales runs another current, subtle but persistent, a gentle paganism preserved like pressed flowers between the pages of officially Christian cultures. The magical helpers, talking animals, and nature spirits that populate these tales echo older animistic worldviews, where forests, rivers, and mountains housed conscious presences that could help or hinder human endeavors. When the protagonist shows kindness to an animal or treats nature with respect, they acknowledge interdependence with the more than human world, a relationship modern societies have largely forgotten, but indigenous wisdom traditions have always preserved. This relationship appears most clearly in tales where the natural world actively assists the worthy human. Birds help Cinderella sort lentils. Animals gather to help Snow White. Fish return rings lost in the sea. These motifs reflect ancient understanding that humanity exists not separate from, but embedded within the natural world, dependent upon and responsible to its many forms of life. The person who remembers this relationship receives support from unexpected allies. The one who forgets or denies it ultimately faces nature's indifference or active opposition. The witch's cottage deep in the forest, the fairy mound beneath the hill, the palace under the sea. These liminal spaces in fairy tales mark the boundaries between the ordinary world and realms of enhanced meaning or power. When protagonists enter these spaces, they cross thresholds not merely physical, but psychological and spiritual, moving from conventional understanding to deeper knowledge. The descent into a well, the climb up an impossibly high mountain, the journey across 9 kingdoms, all represent the soul's passage beyond familiar limitations toward expanded awareness. This pattern appears with remarkable consistency across cultures, suggesting it reflects something fundamental about human development. The Australian Aboriginal walkabout, Native American vision quest, medieval pilgrimage, or fairy tale journey into enchanted realms all acknowledge that certain forms of knowledge cannot be gained without leaving familiar territory. When Vasilisa must walk to the witch Baba Yaga's house on chicken legs to request fire, her terrifying journey represents the necessary courage required to approach wisdom that exists beyond conventional boundaries. The helpers encountered during these journeys often embody qualities the protagonist has yet to develop or acknowledge. The clever fox, the loyal bear, the wise owl. These beings represent faculties available to humans who recognize their connection to the more than human world. When the lost child accepts guidance from forest creatures, they acknowledge their need for wisdom beyond human teaching. When the questing hero follows the advice of an ancient crone, they honor knowledge that comes through experience rather than formal education. Perhaps most striking in fairy tales is the recurring theme of the animate helping the worthy and hindering the unworthy. The same spinning wheel that pricks the finger of the careless princess might spin gold for the diligent miller's daughter. The same forest that leads one traveler to safety might lead another in endless circles. This pattern suggests a world responsive to human intention and character, where nature itself distinguishes between authentic and inauthentic action. The humble woodcutter who shares his last crust of bread receives magical assistance. The arrogant prince who demands service finds himself transformed into a beast. As we continue our gentle exploration of this ancient territory, we notice how frequently fairy tales deal with the ethics of promise-keeping and oath-breaking. The king who forgets his promise to a helpful frog. The girl who reveals a secret she swore to keep. The father who thoughtlessly offers his daughter in exchange for wealth. These cautionary moments emphasize the binding nature of the given word. When the king, in Rumpelstiltskin, attempts to avoid fulfilling his promise to give the strange little man his firstborn child, the tale suggests that even monarchs remain bound by their pledges, a powerful message in societies where rulers often claimed exemption from ordinary moral constraints. This emphasis on promise keeping reflects a time when written contracts held less force than spoken vows, when a person's word represented their essential integrity and social standing. The consequences for broken promises in fairy tales are typically severe. Kingdoms fall, children are taken, magical helpers withdraw their support. Yet, even here, redemption remains possible through sincere atonement and changed behavior, reflecting the tale's ultimately hopeful view of human capacity for growth and transformation. The magical objects that feature prominently in fairy tales, 7-league boots, cloaks of invisibility, rings that grant wishes, mirrors that speak truth, represent extensions of human capability, tools that overcome natural limitations. When the hero receives a sword that cannot be broken, or a cloak that renders them invisible, they gain temporary access to powers beyond ordinary human capacity. These magical items often come as gifts from helpers, rewards for compassion or cleverness, suggesting that expanded capabilities arrive through relationship rather than solitary effort. Beneath their fantastical appearance, many of these magical objects symbolize genuine human faculties. The mirror represents clear perception. The cloak of invisibility suggests the power of moving unnoticed through difficult situations. The speaking animal embodies intuitive knowledge that transcends rational thought. When the protagonist learns to use these tools wisely, they develop aspects of themselves previously dormant or unrecognized, expanding their capacity to navigate life's challenges. The tests of character that appear throughout fairy tales often involve discernment between appearance and reality. When three brothers encounter the same situation, the two elder typically respond based on conventional assumptions, while the youngest sees beyond surface appearances to deeper truth. When a disguised fairy asks for shelter, the kind daughter welcomes her despite her ugliness, while the vain daughter sends her away. Their respective rewards and punishments, teaching that compassion sees with clearer eyes than prejudice. This emphasis on seeing clearly reaches perhaps its fullest expression in The Emperor's New Clothes, where a child's innocent perception cuts through collective delusion. The tale acknowledges how easily societies maintain comforting fictions through mutual agreement, and how the clear sight of the uninitiated, whether child, fool, or outsider, can dissolve these illusions with a single honest observation. The moment when the crowd finally admits the emperor wears nothing at all celebrates the liberation that comes through acknowledging reality, however uncomfortable that acknowledgement might initially be. The pattern of three wishes that appears in numerous tales explores human desire itself, its nature, its limitations, and its often unexpected consequences. When the fisherman and his wife are granted wishes by a magical fish, their escalating demands for wealth, status, and ultimately godlike power lead to their downfall and return to initial poverty. The tale suggests that desire itself requires discipline and wisdom, that fulfillment of wishes without accompanying inner development leads inevitably to suffering rather than satisfaction. Similarly, tales where protagonists make bargains with supernatural beings, offering firstborn children in exchange for wealth, youth for extended life, souls for worldly success. Examine the genuine human temptation to sacrifice long-term and well-being for immediate advantage. When these bargains ultimately bring suffering rather than happiness, the tales teach not merely caution in making agreements, but the importance of valuing what truly matters over what merely glitters. The transformations of humans into animals that occur throughout fairy tales, brothers become ravens, princesses become swans, princes become beasts, represent both punishment and potential liberation. When transformation comes as punishment, it typically fits the nature of the transgression. The vain become ugly, the greedy become creatures driven by hunger, the cruel become predators that eventually face destruction. Yet even these punitive transformations contain the seed of potential redemption, as the transformed being experiences directly the consequences of their former actions. More ambiguous are transformations that occur through enchantment or fate rather than as direct punishment. When seven brothers become ravens in one grim tale, their transformation represents both loss and preservation. They cannot remain in human society, but gain the freedom of flight and escape the limitations of human form. Their eventual return to human shape through their sister's sacrificial love suggests that transformation ultimately serves growth rather than merely punishment, that even apparent curses may prepare the way for deeper blessing. The theme of recognition runs as a golden thread through countless fairy tales. The moment when the disguised prince is finally seen for who he truly is, when the humble servant is revealed as royalty, when the beast transforms back into human form. These revelations celebrate the human capacity to perceive essence beyond appearance, to recognize the beloved despite altered form. When the prince identifies Cinderella despite her rags, or beauty sees the human eyes within the beast's animal face, they demonstrate the heart's ability to recognize truth, even when conventional perception fails. This theme reaches its most profound expression in tales of separated lovers or family members who recognize each other after years of separation or magical transformation. When a mother recognizes her children despite their animal forms. When siblings identify each other despite enchantment or disguise. When lovers reunite after seemingly impossible separation. These moments celebrate bonds that transcend physical appearance or circumstance, connections that persist beyond all apparent barriers. As night deepens around us and stars wheel slowly overhead, our exploration of this ancient landscape continues to reveal new perspectives, new insights into tales we thought we knew completely. The spinning wheel that appears so frequently in European fairy tales, from Rumpelstiltskin to Sleeping Beauty, carried profound symbolism in societies where spinning and weaving represented not merely practical skills, but metaphors for fate itself. The three fates of Greek mythology spin, measure, and cut the thread of each life. The Norns of Norse tradition weave the destinies of gods and humans alike. When Sleeping Beauty pricks her finger on a spindle, she encounters not merely a sharp point, but the inescapable turning of fate's wheel. Yet even here, the fairy tale maintains its essential optimism. Though fate cannot be avoided entirely, it can be transformed through courage, cleverness, and compassion. When Rumpelstiltskin helps the miller's daughter spin straw into gold, he represents the mysterious alchemy through which seemingly worthless material becomes precious, the transformation of suffering into wisdom, challenge into strength, ordinary experience into meaning. This alchemical process runs throughout fairy tales as their central, most enduring theme. The conversion of the base into the precious through trials that ultimately reveal hidden value. The forests, mountains, and oceans that fairy tale protagonists must traverse represent not merely physical challenges, but the unexplored territories of the human psyche, regions of mystery, danger, and potential that exist within each person. When Hansel and Gretel become lost among the trees, when the questing hero climbs the glass mountain, when the youngest son crosses the boundless sea, these journeys map the internal landscape as much as the external world, charting territories of fear, courage, despair, and triumph that each human encounters on the path to genuine maturity. These symbolic landscapes often contain both danger and assistance, reflecting the complex nature of the unconscious itself. The same forest that harbors wolves also offers berries for sustenance and trees for shelter. The same ocean that threatens drowning may carry the hero to shores of new possibility. When the abandoned child leaves a trail of breadcrumbs or pebbles to find their way home, they demonstrate the human capacity to navigate even the most threatening inner territories through conscious awareness and memory. The repeated motif of humble origins, the miller's daughter, the woodcutter's son, the despised youngest brother, carries profound democratic implications in societies dominated by hereditary privilege. When these seemingly unpromising figures triumph through virtue and wisdom rather than birth or wealth, the tales quietly subvert social hierarchies that claimed certain people were inherently superior to others. The servant who wins the princess through cleverness, the poor girl whose kindness earns her royal marriage. These narratives offered hope in societies where advancement through merit remained nearly impossible. Yet, alongside this democratic current runs a more complex understanding of genuine nobility as a quality of character rather than birth. The princess who recognizes worth in the disguised prince, the prince who values kindness above beauty, the ruler who shares food with beggars. These figures represent a true aristocracy of spirit that transcends social position. When the true king or queen is recognized despite disguise or obscurity, the tale suggests that authentic authority derives from inner qualities rather than external trappings of power. The pattern of exile and return that structures so many fairy tales reflects the human experience of alienation and belonging, exclusion and reconciliation. When the princess is banished to the forest, when the youngest son must leave home to seek his fortune, when the husband searches years for his lost wife, these separations represent the necessary journeys away from what is familiar toward what is authentic, movements that may involve temporary loss, but ultimately lead to more genuine connection. This pattern of separation appears most poignantly in tales where children must find their own way through danger without parental protection. When Hansel and Gretel are abandoned in the forest, when Snow White flees her murderous stepmother, when Thumbling makes his tiny way in a world built for giants, these protagonists enact the universal human journey from dependence to autonomy, from protected childhood to the self-reliance of maturity. Their eventual triumph suggests that such separation, though painful, ultimately serves growth rather than merely causing suffering. The appearance of impossible tasks in countless fairy tales, sorting thousands of seeds in a single night, weaving nettles into shirts, filling a sieve with water, represents the overwhelming challenges that life inevitably presents. When the protagonist receives help from ants who sort the seeds, or learns to line the sieve with clay, they demonstrate the human capacity to transform insurmountable obstacles through patience, creativity, and willingness to receive assistance. The message is not that difficulties can be magically avoided, but that they can be overcome through persistence and ingenuity. This wisdom extends to challenges that initially appear completely beyond human capacity. When the queen in Rumpelstiltskin must guess the strange little man's name to save her child, she faces a seemingly impossible riddle, yet solves it through patient observation and help from an unexpected messenger. When the hero must answer 3 impossible questions to win the princess, he succeeds not through cleverness alone, but by accepting guidance from helpers met along the way. These resolutions suggest that wisdom often comes not through solitary brilliance, but through relationship and careful attention to what the world reveals. The motif of the helpful animal appears across cultures with remarkable consistency, suggesting it reflects something fundamental in the human relationship with the more than human world. When birds help Cinderella sort lentils, when a fox guides the lost prince, when fish retrieve golden rings from the ocean floor, these moments acknowledge humanity's dependence on other forms of life, a relationship modern societies have largely forgotten, but indigenous wisdom, traditions have always preserved. The protagonist who shows kindness to animals receives assistance precisely because they recognize this interdependence, this web of relationship that extends beyond human society. This recognition appears perhaps most clearly in tales where humans and animals exchange forms or communicate across species boundaries. When the frog becomes a prince, when the bear reveals himself as an enchanted human, when birds speak warnings or guidance, these moments dissolve the artificial boundary between human and animal, suggesting that consciousness flows through all living beings in different but related forms. The person who remembers this kinship receives support from unexpected allies. The one who forgets or denies it ultimately faces nature's indifference or active opposition. The gardens, wells, and forests that appear throughout fairy tales represent not merely physical locations, but states of consciousness or being. The walled garden, where the heroine finds magical fruit, symbolizes protected potential, cultivated wisdom that nourishes genuine growth. The well into which valuable objects fall represents the depths of the unconscious, where precious aspects of the self may be lost but also recovered. The crossroads, where the protagonist must choose between paths, embodies the moment of genuine choice, where habitual patterns can be abandoned in favor of new possibilities. These symbolic landscapes often contain both danger and nourishment, reflecting the complex nature of growth itself. The same forest that harbors wolves also offers berries for sustenance and trees for shelter. The same castle that imprisons also protects. The same mountain that threatens death also offers perspective. When the abandoned child gathers berries in the forest or drinks from a magical stream, they demonstrate the human capacity to find sustenance even in threatening circumstances, to discover resources where none initially appeared. The repeated motif of siblings, whether supportive or rivalrous, explores the complex dynamics of family relationships and the different strategies humans develop for navigating life's challenges. When brothers take different paths through the forest, when sisters show contrasting responses to magical beings, when twins mirror and complement each other's qualities, these narratives acknowledge the multiplicity within human nature itself, the different aspects of personality that may conflict or cooperate in the journey toward wholeness. This multiplicity appears most vividly in tales where siblings represent contrasting approaches to life's challenges. When the elder brothers rely on strength or cunning, while the youngest shows compassion or humility, the tale examines not merely different individuals, but different faculties within each person. The ultimate triumph of the seemingly least promising sibling suggests that genuine success requires integration of qualities society often undervalues: patience, compassion, willingness to appear foolish, openness to guidance from unexpected sources. The theme of recognition that runs throughout fairy tales celebrates the human capacity to perceive essence beyond appearance, to identify the beloved despite altered form. When the prince recognizes Cinderella despite her rags, when beauty sees the human eyes within the beast's animal face, when siblings identify each other after years of separation or enchantment, these moments honor connections that transcend circumstance, relationships that persist beyond all apparent barriers. This theme reaches perhaps its most profound expression in tales of separated lovers or family members who recognize each other despite enchantment or disguise. When a mother knows her children despite their animal forms, when lovers reunite after seemingly impossible separation, when siblings identify each other after years apart. These reunions celebrate bonds that transcend physical appearance or circumstance, connections that persist when all external signs have changed or disappeared. The transformations that occur throughout fairy tales, humans becoming animals, peasants becoming royalty, the ugly becoming beautiful, represent both warning and promise. When transformation comes as punishment, it typically fits the nature of the transgression. The vain become ugly, the cruel become predators, the greedy become creatures driven by hunger. Yet, even punitive transformations contain the seed of potential redemption, as the transformed being experiences directly the consequences of their former actions or attitudes. More ambiguous are transformations that occur through enchantment or fate rather than as direct punishment. When seven brothers become ravens, their transformation represents both loss and preservation. They cannot remain in human society, but gain the freedom of flight and escape human limitations. Their eventual return to human form through their sister's sacrificial love suggests that transformation ultimately serves growth rather than merely punishment, that even apparent curses may prepare the way for deeper blessing. The pattern of three wishes that appears in numerous tales examines human desire itself, its nature, its limitations, and its often unexpected consequences. When the fisherman and his wife receive wishes from a magical fish, their escalating demands for wealth, status, and ultimately godlike power lead to their downfall and return to initial poverty. The tale suggests that desire requires wisdom, that fulfillment of wishes without accompanying inner development leads inevitably to suffering rather than satisfaction. Similarly, tales where protagonists make bargains with supernatural beings, offering firstborn children in exchange for wealth, youth for extended life, souls for worldly success, explore the genuine human temptation to sacrifice long-term well-being for immediate advantage. When these bargains ultimately bring suffering rather than happiness, the tales teach not merely caution in making agreements, but the importance of valuing what truly matters over what merely glitters or impresses. The repetition that characterizes fairy tales, three wishes, three siblings, three attempts, three tasks, reflects deeper wisdom about the nature of human development. The first attempt typically represents physical effort, the second mental strategy, and the third a unification of heart, mind, and body that finally succeeds where partial approaches failed. This pattern acknowledges that genuine achievement requires the integration of multiple faculties, not merely strength or cleverness alone. This tripartite structure appears with remarkable consistency across cultures, suggesting it reflects something fundamental about human learning and growth. The first failure teaches humility. The second develops perseverance. The third integrates the lessons of both previous attempts. When the youngest son succeeds where his brothers failed, or the third task reveals what the first two concealed, the tale suggests that genuine wisdom emerges only through process, through the willingness to learn from initial failure rather than abandoning the journey. The magical objects that appear throughout fairy tales, seven-league boots, invisibility cloaks, speaking mirrors, lamps containing genies, represent extensions of human capability, tools that overcome natural limitations. When the hero receives a sword that cannot be broken, or shoes that cross vast distances in a single step, they gain temporary access to powers beyond ordinary human capacity. These magical items typically come as gifts from helpers, rewards for compassion or cleverness, suggesting that expanded capabilities arrive through relationship rather than solitary effort. Yet these magical objects often come with specific conditions or limitations. They work only for the worthy, function only in certain circumstances, or require precise words or gestures to activate their power. These limitations reflect the understanding that even extraordinary capabilities require responsible use. That power, without corresponding wisdom, inevitably leads to destruction rather than fulfillment. When the magical object is lost or misused, the protagonist must rely on inner resources rather than external assistance, developing qualities that no object can provide. The talking animals that appear in countless fairy tales embody humanity's ancient understanding that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. When the smallest ant offers crucial advice, when birds reveal secrets humans have concealed, when fish retrieve objects from the ocean depths, these moments suggest that guidance often arrives in forms easy to overlook or dismiss. The protagonist who listens to these unexpected counselors succeeds precisely because they remain open to wisdom from sources conventional thinking might ignore. This openness to guidance from the more than human world appears especially in tales where animals reveal themselves as transformed humans or supernatural beings in disguise. When the bear removes his fur to show a handsome prince beneath, when the frog transforms into royalty, when the helpful bird reveals herself as an enchanted princess, these moments dissolve the boundary between human and animal, suggesting that consciousness flows through all beings in different but related forms. The person who acknowledges this kinship receives support from unlikely allies. The one who maintains artificial separation ultimately faces nature's indifference. The enchanted sleep that appears in tales like Sleeping Beauty or Snow White represents a necessary period of dormancy or incubation, a time when growth continues beneath the surface, though no outer activity appears. When the princess sleeps for 100 years behind a wall of thorns, her apparent stasis actually preserves her until the right moment for awakening arrives. This pattern reflects natural cycles of dormancy and renewal. The seed that appears lifeless in winter soil, but carries within itself the pattern of future flowering. The chrysalis that seems static, but shelters profound transformation. This theme of dormancy and awakening extends to tales where protagonists must maintain silence while performing seemingly impossible tasks, often to break enchantments placed on loved ones. When the sister in The Wild Swans cannot speak while weaving shirts from nettles to free her brothers from bird form, her enforced silence represents the necessary patience of genuine transformation, the understanding that certain processes cannot be rushed by force of will, but must unfold according to their own internal timing. The gates, doors, and keys that appear throughout fairy tales represent thresholds between different states of being or understanding. When the protagonist discovers a previously unseen door in a familiar wall, when a mysterious key opens a forbidden chamber, when a password grants access to hidden treasure, these moments represent transitions from one level of awareness to another, movements from conventional understanding to deeper knowledge. The door that cannot be opened by force, but yields to the proper word or gesture, teaches that certain thresholds yield only to the properly prepared seeker. That genuine advancement cannot be rushed or forced. This wisdom appears perhaps most clearly in tales where protagonists must not merely find keys, but know exactly how to use them. When Bluebeard's wife receives keys to all chambers, but is forbidden to enter one specific room, her eventual decision to unlock the prohibited door represents both necessary disobedience and the inescapable human drive toward complete knowledge, even when that knowledge brings pain or danger. Her discovery of previous wives' murdered bodies reveals truths that conventional wisdom sought to keep hidden, but which must be confronted for genuine growth to occur. The mirrors that appear in tales like Snow White or Beauty and the Beast symbolize the human capacity for self-reflection, for seeing beyond surface appearance to deeper reality. When the queen's mirror speaks truth she cannot acknowledge, when beauty sees past the beast's frightening appearance to the wounded heart beneath, these moments celebrate the possibility of perception unclouded by prejudice or self-deception. The mirror that shows not merely physical appearance, but inner nature, represents the clarified awareness that comes through genuine self-knowledge. This theme of true seeing versus false appearance runs throughout fairy tales worldwide. When the emperor parades naked while believing himself finely clothed, when the humble servant reveals wisdom no advisor possesses, when the ugly old woman offers guidance no beautiful princess can provide. These reversals of conventional value teach that genuine worth often hides beneath unpromising surfaces, that wisdom frequently arrives in forms easy to dismiss or underestimate. The repeated motif of the false bride or bridegroom explores the human capacity for deception and the challenge of discerning authentic connection from its counterfeit. When the prince almost marries the wrong sister, when the monster disguises himself as the true lover, when the impostor attempts to claim the throne, these moments of potential error heighten awareness of what genuine recognition requires. The protagonist who pierces these disguises demonstrates not merely cleverness, but the heart's capacity to recognize essential nature beneath misleading appearance. This theme of recognition reaches perhaps its most profound expression in tales where separated lovers or family members identify each other despite enchantment or disguise. When the princess recognizes her lost brothers despite their raven form. When Sleeping Beauty awakens to a prince whose existence she has known only in dreams. When Beauty sees the human eyes within the beast's animal face. These moments celebrate connections that transcend circumstance, relationships that persist when all external signs have disappeared. The curses that initiate many fairy tale journeys often contain within themselves the seeds of their own dissolution. When Sleeping Beauty can be awakened only by a prince's kiss. When the beast will remain animal until loved in his monstrous form. When the enchanted brothers can be freed only by their sister's sacrificial silence. These conditional curses acknowledge both the reality of suffering and the possibility of its transformation through love, courage, or compassion. The curse represents not permanent condemnation, but necessary challenge, the difficult circumstance that initiates genuine growth. This understanding of curses as disguised opportunities appears most clearly in tales where the apparent villain later reveals benevolent intentions. When the seemingly cruel witch later explains that her harshness protected the protagonist from worse fate, when the frightening magical being tests the hero before offering crucial assistance, these revelations suggest that apparent obstacles often serve necessary functions in the journey toward maturity. The initial curse becomes not punishment, but initiation, the difficult beginning that makes possible a more authentic ending. The motif of weaving, spinning, and sewing that appears throughout fairy tales carries profound symbolic weight. When the princess must spin straw into gold, when the sister weaves shirts from nettles to free her enchanted brothers, when the faithful wife sews shirts for her lost husband, these tasks represent the human capacity to transform raw experience into meaning, to create pattern and purpose from what initially appears chaotic or worthless. The spindle, loom, and needle become tools not merely of practical creation, but of spiritual transformation. This symbolism reaches perhaps its fullest expression in tales where weaving literally alters fate or reality. When the Greek Penelope unravels each night what she has woven by day to keep suitors at bay until her husband returns, when the enchanted swan maiden weaves magical garments that allow flight between worlds, when the silent sister in The Wild, Swans, creates shirts that transform her brothers from birds to humans. These moments acknowledge the power of human hands to reshape circumstance, to create order from chaos, beauty from pain, meaning from apparent randomness. The wounds that appear throughout fairy tales, the princess pricking her finger on a spindle, the queen cutting her finger and dropping blood on snow, the beast bearing injuries that cannot heal, represent initiatory experiences that, though painful, ultimately serve transformation. When beauty's tears fall on the dying beast and restore him to life, when the youngest son's wound reveals him as the true prince, when the princess's bloody feet expose her sister's deception, these moments of vulnerability become paradoxically moments of power, instances where apparent weakness reveals itself as unacknowledged strength. This understanding of wounding as potentially transformative appears most clearly in tales where the protagonist must be broken before becoming whole. When the tin soldier melts in fire but is recast into new form, when the ugly duckling suffers rejection before discovering his true nature, when the beast's apparent death precedes his restoration as human, these moments reflect the ancient wisdom that genuine transformation often requires a form of symbolic death, a surrender of former identity before new integration becomes possible. The food and feasting that feature prominently in many fairy tales carry significance beyond mere sustenance. When the protagonist accepts or refuses food from magical beings, when seemingly ordinary apples or bread contain transformative power, when feast tables appear or disappear without human effort, these moments acknowledge that nourishment involves more than mere physical satisfaction. The magical food in fairy tales represents knowledge, relationship, and connection to sources of sustenance beyond the merely physical or material. This understanding appears perhaps most clearly in tales where acceptance or rejection of offered food determines the protagonist's fate. When Snow White accepts the poisoned apple, when Persephone consumes pomegranate seeds in the underworld, when Hansel and Gretel resist the witch's offered sweets, these moments of choice represent the discernment required to distinguish genuine nourishment from that which ultimately harms or enslaves. The protagonist who fasts when others feast, or who shares food when others hoard, demonstrates wisdom about what truly sustains human flourishing. The dance that appears in tales like The 12 Dancing Princesses or The Red Shoes represents both freedom and compulsion, the human capacity for joyful movement and the danger of being moved by forces beyond conscious control. When princesses wear out their slippers each night, dancing in an underground realm, when magical red shoes force their wearer to dance without ceasing, these contrasting images explore the boundary between chosen expression and dangerous obsession, between movement that liberates and movement that consumes. This ambivalence appears throughout fairy tales in motifs of enchanted music or irresistible rhythms. When the piper leads children away with melodies parents cannot hear. When the fairy hill opens only for those who can hear its subterranean music. When dancers cannot stop until shoes are removed or spells broken. These moments acknowledge both the transformative power of rhythm and the dangers of surrendering completely to its pull. The protagonist, who maintains awareness while entering the dance, represents balanced engagement with life's joyful movement. The bridges, boats, and paths that appear throughout fairy tales represent transitions between different states of being or understanding. When the protagonist crosses a bridge that disappears behind them, when a magical boat carries them to shores invisible from their starting point, when a path appears that others cannot see, these moments represent movements from one level of consciousness to another, transitions that require courage, faith, or special perception to undertake successfully. This wisdom appears perhaps most clearly in tales where crossings become possible only under specific conditions. When the bridge holds only for the worthy traveler, when the boat appears only for those who speak the proper words, when the path becomes visible only to those who have performed necessary rituals, these conditional passages teach that certain transitions can be made only by the properly prepared seeker, that genuine advancement follows internal development rather than merely external action. The wells, springs, and fountains that feature prominently in fairy tales represent sources of renewal and transformation. When the protagonist drinks from a magical spring, when they retrieve golden balls or magical tokens from well depths, when they receive visions while gazing into still water, these encounters acknowledge the mysterious sources of vitality and wisdom that exist beyond rational understanding. The well represents not merely physical sustenance, but spiritual nourishment, connection to sources that conventional knowledge cannot reach or explain. This symbolism reaches its fullest expression in tales where water itself becomes transformative. When the dead are restored by water from a magical spring, when bitter wells turn sweet through proper words or gestures, when tears dissolve enchantments that no other force could break, these moments celebrate water's capacity to dissolve, cleanse, and renew, to wash away what no longer serves and nourish what seeks to emerge. The protagonist, who finds the hidden spring or recognizes the healing properties of ordinary water, demonstrates awareness of regenerative possibilities present in the apparently commonplace. The repeated motif of the hidden child, abandoned in forests, raised by animals, concealed by humble appearance, explores both vulnerability and resilience, the tension between the need for protection and the necessity of eventual emergence. When Moses floats in a basket among reeds, when Romulus and Remus are suckled by a wolf, when Snow White finds refuge with dwarves in the forest, these narratives acknowledge both the genuine dangers that threaten new growth and the surprising resources that sustain it despite apparent abandonment. This pattern appears with remarkable consistency across cultures, suggesting it reflects something fundamental about human development. The child who grows in secret, hidden from forces that would destroy it, represents potential that must be protected until sufficiently strong to withstand opposition. When the hidden prince finally claims his throne, when the disguised princess reveals her true identity, when the humble servant shows wisdom no advisor possesses, these revelations suggest that genuine worth often develops not through privilege but through the strength gained in apparent obscurity. The pattern of exile and return that structures so many fairy tales reflects the human experience of alienation and belonging, exclusion and reconciliation. When the princess is banished to the forest, when the youngest son must leave home to seek his fortune, when the husband searches years for his lost wife, these separations represent necessary journeys away from what is familiar toward what is authentic, movements that may involve temporary loss, but ultimately lead to more genuine connection. This understanding of exile as potentially transformative appears most clearly in tales where banishment leads to unexpected discovery. When the exiled princess learns self-reliance in the forest, when the wandering son discovers helpers no palace could contain, when the outcast discovers gifts only solitude could reveal, these unexpected blessings suggest that apparent misfortune often conceals opportunity, that the path of greatest growth rarely follows anticipated routes. The protagonist who returns, transformed from exile, demonstrates not merely survival, but the capacity to transform hardship into unexpected harvest. The giants, ogres, and monsters that populate fairy tale landscapes represent forces that threaten not merely individual survival, but the community's well-being. Famine, plague, tyranny, or war given concrete form. When Jack climbs the beanstalk and outwits the giant, stealing back wealth that properly belongs to humans, he enacts a symbolic reclaiming of prosperity from forces that would hoard or destroy it. His triumph celebrates human ingenuity as a counterforce to brute strength and power. Yet these seemingly straightforward confrontations often contain surprising complexity. When the monster reveals himself as an enchanted prince, when the fearsome dragon guards wisdom as well as treasure, when the witch's apparent cruelty masks protective intention, these revelations suggest that what appears monstrous may contain unexpected gifts. That genuine discernment requires looking beyond initial fear to the possible transformation hidden within apparent threat. The tasks of sorting seeds, gathering impossible objects, or answering unanswerable riddles symbolize the necessary process of discrimination. Learning to separate truth from falsehood, appearance from reality, the essential from the trivial. When Psyche must sort a massive pile of mixed seeds in a single night, her seemingly impossible labor represents the human task of bringing order to the chaos of experience, a process that requires both patience and discernment. When ants come to help her, the tale acknowledges that such overwhelming tasks require not merely individual effort, but assistance from unexpected sources. This pattern appears throughout fairy tales worldwide, suggesting it reflects fundamental human challenges. When the protagonist must separate grain from chaff, wheat from tares, or gold from straw, these sorting tasks represent the essential human labor of determining what nourishes and what merely distracts, what genuinely matters and what only appears significant. The successful completion of these tasks, often with help from magical beings, suggests that such discernment becomes possible not through intellectual effort alone, but through relationship and openness to guidance. The disguises that feature prominently in many tales, princes who appear as beggars, princesses who hide their beauty under ashes or animal skins, teach the essential lesson that appearance often masks reality. When the ugly crone requests shelter and later reveals herself as a goddess, when the frightening beast harbors a noble heart, when the simple peasant possesses wisdom kings would envy, these reversals of expectation train listeners in the vital skill of looking beyond surface appearances to deeper truth. This wisdom reaches perhaps its fullest expression in tales where protagonists must disguise themselves to accomplish necessary tasks. When the princess dresses as a kitchen maid to escape danger, when the prince travels as a humble merchant to test his beloved's faithfulness, when the hero pretends weakness to disarm a powerful opponent, these strategic concealments suggest that, sometimes, truth must hide temporarily to ultimately prevail. That genuine value may require protective covering until the right moment for revelation arrives. The pattern of 3 siblings, 3 wishes, 3 attempts, or 3 tasks that appears with remarkable consistency across fairy tale traditions acknowledges both the progressive nature of genuine learning and the necessity of persistence in the face of initial failure. The first brother typically follows conventional wisdom and fails. The second relies on cleverness and falls short. The third integrates heart, mind, and body to finally succeed where partial approaches failed. This pattern teaches that genuine achievement requires not merely persistence, but evolution of approach, the capacity to learn from initial failure rather than merely repeating it. This tripartite structure appears even in the smallest details of fairy tales. 3 drops of blood revealing truth, 3 hairs from the devil providing answers, 3 nights of vigil revealing hidden knowledge. The repetition of threes suggests that truth emerges not in single revelations, but through process, through patient attention that allows patterns to emerge over time. When the third question reveals what the first 2 concealed, or the third gift contains what the others merely hinted at, the tale acknowledges the layered nature of genuine understanding. The old woman, who appears at crucial moments in countless fairy tales, sometimes as helper, sometimes as challenger, sometimes as both simultaneously, represents wisdom that comes through lived experience rather than theoretical knowledge. When she offers the protagonist bread from her own meager store, when she requests shelter despite her frightening appearance, when she provides guidance that contradicts conventional advice, she embodies knowledge that exists outside approved channels. Wisdom society both fears and needs. This figure appears across cultures with remarkable consistency, suggesting she represents something fundamental in human experience. The old woman who knows which plants heal and which kill, who understands birth and death with equal intimacy, who recognizes patterns younger eyes cannot see. She embodies the accumulated wisdom of generations, knowledge preserved not in written texts, but in the practices and perspectives of those whose direct experience transcends theoretical understanding. The themes of keeping silence and breaking silence that appear throughout fairy tales acknowledge both the power of speech and the wisdom of restraint. When the sister must remain mute while weaving shirts to free her enchanted brothers, when the mermaid trades her voice for human legs, when the faithful wife cannot explain actions that appear incomprehensible, these enforced silences represent both genuine constraint and the deeper communication that exists beyond words, the patient trust that continues when explanation becomes impossible. Conversely, moments when silence finally breaks often mark crucial transformations. When the beast speaks with human voice, when the enchanted bird reveals himself as the lost prince, when the silent child finally names the evil that others pretend not to see. These utterances represent truth that can no longer be contained, reality breaking through the constraints of convention or enchantment. The protagonist, who maintains necessary silence but speaks at the crucial moment, demonstrates wisdom about both the limitations and the power of human speech. The kings and queens who appear throughout fairy tales represent not merely social authority, but aspects of the mature self, the inner sovereignty achieved when wisdom balances power. When an old king offers his daughter to whoever can perform an impossible task, he embodies the necessary challenge that must be overcome before genuine maturity can be claimed. The false princes who attempt shortcuts or rely on deception inevitably fail, teaching that authentic development cannot be rushed or falsified. This understanding of royalty as symbolic rather than merely literal appears most clearly in tales where the true monarch must be recognized despite disguise or obscurity. When the humble gardener reveals the wisdom that identifies him as the kingdom's rightful ruler, when the king travels disguised to learn the condition of his subjects, when the queen recognizes worth in a suitor others dismiss, these moments suggest that authentic authority derives from inner qualities rather than external trappings, from character rather than mere position or appearance. The gifts that feature prominently in fairy tales, whether apples that bring sleep, combs that transform, or swords that cannot be broken, represent both opportunity and challenge, potential blessing and potential danger, depending on how they are received and used. When Snow White accepts the poisoned apple from her disguised stepmother, when Sleeping Beauty touches the spindle despite warnings, when the youngest son receives a seemingly worthless object that later proves magical. These moments of exchange acknowledge that genuine gifts often arrive in forms easy to misinterpret or dismiss. This ambivalence appears perhaps most clearly in tales where the same object brings blessing to one recipient and curse to another. When the same comb that adorns one sister's hair turns another to stone, when the same food nourishes the worthy and poisons the cruel, when the same fountain grants wishes to the humble but punishes the arrogant, these discriminating objects teach that the effect of any gift depends as much on the recipient's nature as on the gift itself. That identical circumstances may yield radically different outcomes depending on how they are approached and understood. The wild hunt that thunders through the skies in European folklore, the underground kingdoms that open only on certain nights, the fairy hills that become visible only under specific conditions. These liminal realms and moments represent thresholds between ordinary awareness and enhanced perception, between conventional understanding and deeper knowledge. When the protagonist glimpses these normally invisible domains, they access awareness beyond everyday consciousness, perspectives that illuminate ordinary experience while transcending its limitations. This expanded awareness appears perhaps most clearly in tales where time flows differently in magical realms. When the dancer spends what seems like hours in the fairy hill, but emerges to find years have passed in the human world. When the human visitor to underwater kingdoms returns to find centuries have elapsed above the waves. When the sleeping princess awakens unchanged after 100 years. These temporal distortions acknowledge that genuine transformation often occurs in a dimension different from chronological time, that the deepest changes follow rhythms distinct from the calendar's regular progression. The theme of hospitality that runs throughout fairy tales worldwide, the stranger received or rejected, the humble meal shared or withheld, the shelter granted or denied, explores the ethical foundation of human community itself. When the disguised deity rewards those who share their last crust of bread, when the magical helper appears to those who offer shelter despite their own poverty, when the evil spell affects only those who have denied assistance to others in need. These moments acknowledge that community survival depends on mutual support, that genuine prosperity emerges from generosity rather than hoarding or exclusion. This wisdom reaches perhaps its fullest expression in tales where the protagonist's eventual triumph comes directly from earlier acts of seemingly impractical kindness. When the birds she has fed help Cinderella sort lentils, when the ants whose lives the hero spared return to help with impossible tasks, when the fish released back into water later retrieves a golden key. These moments of reciprocal assistance suggest that genuine community functions as a network of mutual obligation and support, that generosity ultimately serves the giver as much as the recipient. The boundaries and thresholds that appear throughout fairy tales, the hedge of thorns surrounding Sleeping Beauty's castle, the invisible line between human and fairy territories, the door that leads from ordinary cottage to enchanted realm, represent transitions between different states of consciousness or being. When the protagonist crosses a bridge that disappears behind them, enters a door hidden in a familiar wall, or follows a path others cannot see. These boundary crossings acknowledge that certain transitions can be made only through courage, special perception, or proper preparation. This understanding appears perhaps most clearly in tales where crossing becomes possible only under specific conditions. When the thorn hedge parts only for the destined prince, when the magical realm appears only during certain phases of the moon, when the door opens only for those who speak the proper words. These conditional passages teach that certain thresholds yield only to the properly prepared seeker, that genuine advancement follows internal development rather than merely external action or ambition. The pattern of conditional curses that appears throughout fairy tales acknowledges both the reality of suffering and the possibility of its transformation through love, courage, or compassion. When the beast will remain animal until loved in his monstrous form, when the enchanted brothers can be freed only through their sister's sacrificial silence, when the frozen heart can be thawed only by an act of genuine self-sacrifice. These situations suggest that affliction itself may contain the seed of its own dissolution, that the path through difficulty may reveal itself to those who face it with appropriate spirit. This wisdom appears most clearly in tales where the apparent curse later reveals itself as disguised opportunity, when the seemingly cruel banishment leads to unexpected discovery, when the wandering exile finds helpers no palace could contain, when the frightening transformation reveals aspects of self previously unknown. These unexpected blessings suggest that apparent misfortune often conceals opportunity, that the path of greatest growth rarely follows anticipated routes. The protagonist who emerges transformed from apparent curse demonstrates not merely survival, but the capacity to transform challenge into unexpected harvest. The motif of the false bride or bridegroom explores the human capacity for deception and the challenge of discerning authentic connection from its counterfeit. When the prince almost marries the wrong sister, when the monster disguises himself as the true lover, when the impostor attempts to claim the throne through resemblance to the rightful heir, these moments of potential error heighten awareness of what genuine recognition requires. The protagonist who pierces these disguises demonstrates not merely cleverness, but the heart's capacity to recognize essential nature beneath misleading appearance. This theme reaches perhaps its most profound expression in tales of separated lovers or family members who recognize each other despite enchantment or disguise. When the princess identifies her lost brothers despite their raven form. When Sleeping Beauty awakens to a prince whose existence she has known only in dreams. When Beauty sees the human eyes within the beast's animal face. These moments celebrate connections that transcend circumstance, relationships that persist when all external signs have disappeared or been deliberately obscured. The helpers encountered during fairy tale journeys often embody qualities the protagonist has yet to develop or acknowledge. The clever fox, the patient ant, the wise owl, the compassionate deer. These beings represent faculties available to humans who recognize their connection to the more than human world. When the lost child accepts guidance from forest creatures, they acknowledge their need for wisdom beyond human teaching. When the questing hero follows advice from an ancient crone, they honor knowledge that comes through experience rather than formal education or social privilege. This pattern appears with remarkable consistency across cultures, suggesting it reflects something fundamental about human development. The ants who help sort seeds, the fish who retrieve lost rings, the birds who offer crucial warnings. These helpers embody intelligence distributed throughout the living world rather than concentrated in human form alone. The protagonist who accepts this assistance acknowledges that genuine wisdom draws from multiple sources, that the most crucial guidance often comes in forms easy to overlook or dismiss as insignificant. The tests of character that appear throughout fairy tales often involve seemingly small choices with enormous consequences. When three brothers encounter the same situation, the two elder typically respond from conventional self-interest, while the youngest shows compassion or humility. When a disguised fairy asks for shelter, the kind daughter welcomes her despite her ugliness, while the vain daughter sends her away. Their respective rewards and punishments, teaching that compassion sees with clearer eyes than prejudice or self-concern. This emphasis on seemingly minor choices reaching far beyond their immediate context appears throughout world folklore. When the humble woodcutter shares his last crust with a stranger, when the lost traveler shows kindness to an injured animal, when the child speaks truth adults have agreed to ignore. These moments of authentic response ripple outward with consequences far beyond their apparent significance. The tale suggests that character reveals itself most clearly not in dramatic moments, but in small, seemingly private choices made when no reward appears immediately visible. The repeated motif of the lost or stolen child explores both vulnerability and resilience, the tension between genuine danger and surprising protection. When Rapunzel is taken by the witch, when the miller's daughter must surrender her firstborn to Rumpelstiltskin, when changelings replace human babies in their cradles, these narratives acknowledge real threats to the community's most vulnerable members while suggesting that unexpected protection often emerges precisely when conventional safeguards have failed. This pattern appears with remarkable consistency across cultures, suggesting it reflects universal parental fears as well as deeper truths about human development. The stolen child who grows in secret, the abandoned infant raised by animals or magical beings, the offspring hidden from forces that would destroy it. These narratives acknowledge both genuine dangers and the surprising resilience that allows new life to flourish even in hostile environments. When the lost child eventually finds their way home or creates a new home in unlikely circumstances, the tale celebrates human adaptability as much as the comfort of eventual reunion. The theme of broken promises that runs throughout fairy tales, the forgotten vow, the betrayed trust, the casually made pledge with unforeseen consequences, emphasizes the binding nature of the given word. When the king forgets his promise to a helpful frog, when the girl reveals a secret she swore to keep, when the father thoughtlessly offers his daughter in exchange for wealth, these cautionary moments teach that words once spoken cannot be simply withdrawn when their consequences prove inconvenient or frightening. This emphasis on promise keeping reflects societies where written contracts held less force than spoken vows, where a person's word represented their essential integrity and social standing. The severe consequences for broken promises in fairy tales, kingdoms falling, children taken, magical helpers withdrawing their support, reflect genuine social penalties for those who failed to honor their pledges. Yet, even here, redemption remains possible through sincere atonement and changed behavior, reflecting the tale's ultimately hopeful view of human capacity for growth and transformation. The enchanted objects that appear in countless fairy tales, mirrors that speak truth, combs that transform, apples that bring sleep or death, represent the mysterious power certain physical items acquire through their connection to deeper meaning or intention. When Snow White's stepmother gazes into her truth-telling mirror, when Sleeping Beauty pricks her finger on a spindle, when Beauty sees her father in the Beast's magical mirror, these objects serve as bridges between different levels of reality, connections between visible and invisible realms of experience. This understanding of objects as potentially numinous, as carriers of meaning beyond their material form, reflects an older relationship with the physical world that modern materialist perspectives have largely forgotten. When the spindle pricks Sleeping Beauty's finger, despite all precautions, when the poisoned comb affects only the intended victim, when the glass mountain can be climbed only with iron shoes, these discriminating objects suggest that material, reality responds to intention and relationship, rather than functioning as mere neutral backdrop for human activity. The towers, caves, and enclosed spaces that appear throughout fairy tales represent both protection and constraint, the tension between safety and the necessity of eventual emergence. When Rapunzel grows to maturity in her isolated tower, when Snow White finds refuge in the dwarf's cottage, when Sleeping Beauty sleeps behind a hedge of thorns, these enclosed spaces shelter vulnerability until it develops sufficient strength to withstand external challenges. Yet these same protective spaces eventually become constraining, requiring the protagonist to move beyond their boundaries toward fuller participation in the larger world. This pattern reflects the genuine human experience of development, the tension between the need for protection and the necessity of risk. When the tower that once sheltered becomes a prison, when the cave that offered refuge begins to feel like a tomb, when the hidden cottage can no longer contain growing awareness or capacity, these moments of necessary transition acknowledge that genuine growth requires leaving safety behind, venturing beyond established boundaries toward unknown but necessary experience. The wicked stepmothers and jealous queens who appear so frequently in European fairy tales represent not merely female rivalry, but the shadow aspects of the maternal that must be confronted and integrated rather than denied. When Snow White's stepmother cannot tolerate the younger woman's beauty, when Cinderella's stepmother favors her biological children over her husband's daughter, when the queen attempts to destroy her son's commoner bride, these conflicts reflect genuine human fears about aging and replacement, anxieties that remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Yet even these seemingly straightforward antagonists contain surprising complexity. When the jealous queen recognizes her stepdaughter's genuine worth at the tale's conclusion, when the harsh stepmother is revealed to have protected the child from worse fate, when the seemingly cruel witch later explains that her apparent heartlessness served necessary purpose. These moments of reconciliation or revelation suggest that even the most difficult relationships contain possibility for transformation, that apparent enemies may serve as catalysts for necessary growth. The journeys to seemingly impossible destinations that appear throughout fairy tales, castles east of the sun and west of the moon, islands that exist beyond ordinary geography, realms accessible only through dream or trance, represent movements beyond conventional understanding toward expanded awareness. When the questing hero travels to lands no map records, when the banished princess finds her way to kingdoms that exist between worlds, when the youngest son discovers treasures in regions others consider worthless or empty, these journeys beyond established boundaries celebrate human capacity to venture into uncharted territory, both physical and psychological. This pattern appears with remarkable consistency across cultures, suggesting it reflects something fundamental about human development. The Australian Aboriginal walkabout, Native American vision quest, medieval pilgrimage, or fairy tale journey into enchanted realms all acknowledge that certain forms of knowledge cannot be gained without leaving familiar territory. When the protagonist returns from these seemingly impossible journeys, bearing gifts no local market could provide, they demonstrate that genuine growth often requires venturing beyond conventional maps toward territories unmarked but essential for complete human development. As our journey through this enchanted landscape draws toward conclusion, we might consider why these ancient tales continue to resonate so powerfully despite their apparent distance from contemporary experience. Why do stories of enchanted forests and speaking animals, magical objects, and supernatural beings continue to engage imagination when daily life seems dominated by technology and rational calculation? What wisdom do these seemingly simple narratives continue to offer in an age of unprecedented complexity and change? Perhaps their enduring power lies precisely in what they offer, that contemporary experience increasingly lacks: a sense of the world as meaningful rather than merely material, as responsive to human intention and character rather than governed solely by blind mechanical forces. When the humble woodcutter receives magical assistance while his greedy neighbor finds only misfortune, when the kind sister discovers treasure while her cruel sibling meets well-deserved punishment, these moments suggest a universe that distinguishes between authentic and inauthentic action, a reality that responds to human quality rather than merely human force or cleverness. This moral intelligibility appears throughout fairy tales worldwide, suggesting it reflects deep human intuition about the nature of reality itself. When the same forest leads one traveler safely home, but another in endless circles, when the same well offers refreshment to one seeker, but remains dry for another, when the same magical being helps one character while hindering another, these discriminating responses suggest a world where intention matters as much as action, where how one approaches experience proves as significant as what one does or acquires. This intuition stands in stark contrast to purely mechanistic understandings of reality that recognize only material causation while dismissing meaning as merely subjective projection. When fairy tales suggest that kindness receives blessing while cruelty meets appropriate consequence, they offer not naive wishful thinking, but acknowledgement of patterns observed throughout human experience. That genuine prosperity emerges from generosity rather than exploitation. That communities flourish through mutual support rather than mere competition. That well-being follows recognition of interdependence rather than pursuit of isolated advantage. Perhaps most significantly, fairy tales offer what contemporary experience increasingly lacks: a vision of transformation as fundamental rather than exceptional, of change as potentially redemptive rather than merely disruptive. When the beast becomes human through love's recognition, when the abandoned child discovers unexpected allies in seeming wilderness, when the exiled hero returns bearing wisdom no palace education could provide, these transformative journeys acknowledge difficulty without surrendering to despair, celebrating human resilience without denying genuine suffering or loss. This vision of transformation appears perhaps most clearly in tales where initial misfortune ultimately reveals itself as disguised blessing, when the seeming curse contains within itself the seed of liberation, when the apparent disaster creates opportunity otherwise unavailable, when the wooden puppet becomes a real boy through his journey's challenges rather than despite them. These unexpected reversals suggest that difficulty itself may serve necessary function in human development, that the path to genuine maturity passes through, rather than around, life's inevitable challenges. As stars wheel slowly overhead and night deepens around us, our exploration of this ancient territory draws toward its natural conclusion. We have wandered through enchanted forests and spoken with magical beings, encountered helpful animals and dangerous adversaries, witnessed transformations both frightening and wondrous. We have seen how these seemingly simple tales contain layer upon layer of meaning, how their recurring patterns reflect deep understanding of human development and relationship, how their magical elements acknowledge mysteries rational calculation alone cannot fully comprehend or address. Perhaps this, finally, explains their enduring power, not merely as entertainment, but as carriers of wisdom, difficult to articulate in more direct forms. The fairy tale's indirect approach allows exploration of life's deepest mysteries without reducing them to mere formula or abstract principle. Its concrete imagery speaks directly to imagination rather than merely to intellect, engaging the whole person rather than only analytical faculties. Its magical elements acknowledge dimensions of experience that resist literal description, but nonetheless shape human understanding and development in profound ways. As you drift toward sleep, consider how these ancient tales continue to offer not escape from reality, but deeper engagement with its multiple dimensions. Their forests still grow at civilization's edge. Their magical beings still appear at crucial thresholds. Their transformations still occur in lives open to wonder and possibility. Their journeys still map territories both external and internal. Their challenges still reflect genuine human difficulties. Their resolutions still suggest paths through rather than around life's inevitable obstacles and trials. In their seemingly simple patterns lie maps for territory both ancient and eternally new. The landscape of human development and relationship, the territory of meaning and purpose, the realm where external circumstance and internal quality meet in mysterious but significant ways. Their princes and princesses, witches and woodcutters, magical animals, and enchanted objects continue to speak a language deeper than words alone, addressing parts of human experience that conventional discourse often neglects or dismisses, but which remain essential for complete human flourishing. As consciousness begins to soften and thought gives way to dream, these ancient stories continue their quiet work, weaving through imagination images of difficulty transformed rather than merely escaped, of challenge engaged rather than avoided, of seemingly ordinary life revealed as territory of genuine wonder and significance. Their whispered wisdom accompanies us into sleep's mysterious realm, where transformation continues beyond conscious direction or control, where the soul's journey unfolds according to patterns older than reason, yet essential to its complete development. Rest now in the knowledge that these ancient tales remain available whenever needed, their wisdom neither outdated nor exhausted, despite centuries of telling and retelling. Their forests still grow, their wells still flow, their magical beings still appear at moments of genuine need. Their transformations still occur, their recognitions still unfold, their journeys still lead toward home, not merely as physical location, but as authentic belonging, as alignment between inner nature and outer circumstance, as dwelling in truth rather than merely in territory. Sleep well, knowing that even in dreams, these patterns continue their gentle work, guiding the soul's journey through territories both frightening and wondrous toward its own mysterious completion. The ancient tales accompany us even into night's deepest reaches, their whispered wisdom flowing like underground rivers beneath even the most modern landscapes, nourishing roots that extend far deeper than our current moment or circumstances. In their seemingly simple patterns lie maps for territory, both external and internal, guides for journeys, both collective and uniquely personal, wisdom, both ancient and eternally renewed. Good night. May your dreams be gentle, and may you awaken tomorrow refreshed, perhaps carrying back from sleep's mysterious realm some fragment of wisdom, some glimpse of possibility, some renewal of wonder at life's enduring capacity for transformation and renewal, for unexpected blessing even in apparent difficulty, for meaning that emerges from seemingly random circumstance. In this ancient wisdom lies not escape from reality, but deeper engagement with its multiple dimensions, not denial of difficulty, but faith in human capacity to meet it with courage, creativity, and compassion.